Okay, we're back here. Let's talk about percents as it pertains to the test packet, problems 3 through 8. So I just want you to, again, this is not going to come up until next year. You've talked about percents very briefly in Fred. We know that percents are a number out of 100. So like, let's say we have 7%. We know that means 7 out of 100. Okay, we've just looked at that as in a very simplistic way. We've also gotten to the point, like let's say we already have 8%, then we could do it's 8 out of 100, and we know how to reduce. So we could say, well, 4 goes into 8 2 times, and 4 goes into 125 times, so we could reduce that fraction. But the part that we haven't done is to say, well, what is 8% as a decimal? All right, because we have not really talked about decimals all that much. So how could I write this as a decimal? All right, and what I'm going to say to you is, well, I guess we could do this in two different ways. One is, if you remember that when we talked about decimals, we said this was like the dimes place, and this was like the pennies place. And again, that's just very simplistic. That's not really what they're called. But remember, dimes are 1/10 of a dollar. So the real name for this quote dimes place is the 10th place. And pennies are 1 out of 100 and a dollar. So this place is called the hundredths place. Okay, so if we're talking about 8%, like this, and it's the same as 8 hundredths, that means it's 8 hundredths and no tenths. All right, this is really the same as 0.8 over 100. It's 8 ones and 0 tens, so this becomes the same thing, and as we write it in a decimal, this is 8 hundredths and no tenths. Right, so we could write it like that. Let's say we had 17%. This is 17 out of 100. This is 1 10 and 7 ones. And again, those tens and ones will translate into the tenths place and the hundredths place. We could write this as 0.17. All right, if we had something like 39%, that's 39 out of 100. Again, this is 9 ones and 3 tens. That translates into the tenths and the hundredths place. This would be 3 and 9 right here. So from a very basic point, anytime you have a number here in front of the percent, that it translates into that same number in decimals, but just be careful, because if it's a single digit, you have to put the 0 in front of it. So 8% is not equal to 0.8. That's 8 tenths and 0 ones. So don't do that. It is 0.08. All right, so just always remember that a single digit has a 0 for its tens place. Okay, but then let's talk about some other things. Like let's say it says, write, I don't want to do the exact one that they have. Let's say write 5/8 as a percent. Okay, so I just want to give you some intuitive understanding of this, because realistically, we don't have time on a short video to talk about it. So write 5/8 as a percent. So there's a couple things we could do. First of all, I can compare it to another fraction that I know that's a little bit nicer. And I'm going to say, I'm going to compare it to 4/8. So 4/8 is just slightly smaller than 5/8. And 4/8 we know is 1/2, all right? And 1/2, hopefully you know, is 50%. Okay, so we know that if it says write 5/8 as a percent and they give us some choices, it has to be bigger than 50%, because the nice fraction that's just next to it, 4/8, is 50%. 5/8 should be a little bit bigger than that. The other fraction that we know is 6/8. That reduces to 3/4. All right, and I don't know if you know this or not, but 3/4 is the same thing as 75%. And I'll give you a quick explanation why. If this had a denominator of 100, that would mean I would have to multiply this by 25 and this by 25, and that would give us 75 100ths. So that would be 75% based on our conversation that we just had up here. All right, so if they give you something like 5/8, we don't necessarily know what it is, but we can tell that it's going to be between 50% and 75%. So one strategy I'm going to tell you to use to get your answer is just to estimate. Pick two fractions around it that are nice fractions that will reduce into something that you know, and then just work with that to estimate. Now, if they gave you something like choice A, 43%, choice B, 62%, choice C, 81%, choice D, 12%. Okay, you could eliminate a bunch of these. You could say, well, it has to be between 50 and 75%. That's not that, that's not that, that's not that, it's this one. If they give you several that are in this range, you're just going to have to kind of take a guess. But first, my strategy would say eliminate, and first of all, it's not 62%, so please don't think that that's correct. But my point is that if they give you some that are outside of that range that you've set up, you know you have to pick the one that's inside the range. All right, this is still not correct, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say there. Okay, if they give you several within that range, just try and make a guess. All right, so this should be actually halfway, because 5 is halfway between 4 and 6. Whatever percent it is should be halfway between there. So there's 25 between here, which means it's going to be 12.5. So actually it's 62.5%. The difference between this is 25%. Right, so that means that halfway, which is it's halfway between 4/8 and 6/8. It has to be half of this. Well, half of this, that means that 12.5% is on this side, and 12.5% is on this side, which means this would have to be 62.5%. So they could give us 62.5, and then we would say, yes, that's it. Okay, so again, use nice fractions around the one that you're given to help you come up with an answer. Okay, let's take a look at another one. They might also say, convert 0.85 into a percent. All right, well, we just talked about ones like this. This is the 10ths place, and this is the 100ths place. This is the same as saying I have 8 dimes and 5 nickels. And so this would say I have 85 cents out of 100. I could write 85 100ths. Well, 85 100ths is the same as 85%. It's just going the opposite from what we were talking about a second ago. Before, you knew the percent, and I asked you to write it as a decimal, all right? And now it's just going in the reverse. So if you know the decimal, how do you write it as a percent? They could also say convert 0.9 into a percent. Right, and again, if you have 0.9, that means 9 dimes. Again, it's very simplistic the way I'm saying that, but 9 dimes implies that I have 0 pennies. So 9 dimes and 0 pennies, that's 0.9. And if I were to write that as a percent, I would say that's 90%, right? Tenths, hundredths, dimes, pennies, whatever you get there with 2 decimal places, to convert it into a percent, you just get rid of the decimal and put the percent symbol there. All right, let me just double check to see, am I missing any other types? Oh, they might give you an amount that's not 100. So let's say 48 out of 400 cars are purple. What percent of the cars are purple? All right, so we could say 48 out of 100, nope, out of 400 are purple. All right, and it's asking us to convert it into a percent. Well, again, percent means out of 100. So can we reduce this so that this 400 becomes a 100? Right, well, to do that, we would have to divide the 400 by 4. We would have to divide the 48 by 4. 400 divided by 4 is 100. 48 divided by 4 is 12. And 12 out of 100 is 12%. All right, so again, if they give you something that's not 100, then just make it 100 somehow. Again, and if it were, let's say, 39 out of 300, we would say, all right, I want to make that 100. I need to divide this by 3. Therefore, I need to divide this by 3. 39 divided by 3 is 13. Now, it also might give you something like 38 out of 300, and you're just going to end up with a fraction or a decimal here, or something not quite right. So 38 divided by 3 would give you 12 2/3. All right, so it's possible that they won't make it work out as nicely as I did right here, but you still should be able to get close to the answer. And again, that's what we're trying to do, is pick the most reasonable answer based on just kind of our brief understanding of percents. So I feel like this is going to be the toughest of all the sections that you've done, because we really have not talked much about percents or decimals, but just do the best you can. And again, I'm not even sure that you'll see problems like this on your actual standardized test, because this packet, as I said way back at the beginning, is harder than the ones that people typically see. All right, good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.